The grand ballroom of the Astoria Grand Hotel was nothing short of breathtaking. The kind of venue that felt like it belonged in a fairy tale, with its vaulted ceilings, gold-trimmed walls, and a chandelier so massive it could have lit up an entire castle. Soft music played in the background, a delicate piano melody weaving through the laughter and conversation of my guests. My guests. My wedding. My moment. I should have been floating on air, basking in the warmth of this once-in-a-lifetime day. But something felt off. A weight, heavy and suffocating, pressed against my chest. I swallowed hard, trying to shake off the unease, forcing a smile as I greeted yet another well-wisher. "Thank you so much for coming. It means the world to us." Nathan, my husband, stood by my side, his warm hand gently resting on the small of my back. A grounding touch, a silent reassurance. His eyes, filled with love, met mine. "You okay?" he murmured. I nodded, lying through my teeth. Because the truth? I wasn't okay. And the reason why? I didn't know yet. But I was about to find out. A strange hush rippled through the room. A subtle shift, one I felt before I even turned around. The laughter dimmed. The chatter slowed. Like a collective breath held in anticipation of something about to go horribly wrong. And then I saw her. A vision in white. Madeline. Walking through the grand double doors in a full-blown wedding gown, as if she were the star of this reception. For a moment my brain refused to process what I was seeing. Because this had to be some kind of mistake, right? Some kind of cruel, twisted joke? I blinked. Once. Twice. Hoping, praying that when my eyes opened again, she wouldn't be there. But she was. And she was smirking. Like she had won. Like she had planned this. Like this was always the endgame. A wave of nausea hit me so hard I had to grip the edge of the nearest table. Nathan noticed immediately. Evelyn. I couldn't answer. Because my stepsister, the same woman who had spent her entire life making sure I stayed second best, was now crashing my wedding reception in a freaking bridal gown. She moved slowly, deliberately, like a cat walking into a room full of mice, fully aware of the chaos she was about to cause. Every eye in the ballroom locked onto her. Whispers spreading like wildfire. Is that Madeline? Wait, why is she wearing a wedding dress? Didn't she already have her wedding earlier? I watched as her gaze swept the room, taking in the grandeur, the sheer number of guests. And then? Her lips pursed ever so slightly. Like this wasn't what she expected. Like something had just clicked. Like she realized my wedding wasn't a pathetic afterthought. It was bigger than hers. Her perfectly manicured fingers tightened around the fabric of her gown. Good. Good. Let her feel it. Let her feel that sinking, gut-wrenching dread. The same way I felt every single time she had stolen something from me and walked away without consequence. But unlike before, she wasn't walking away unscathed this time. No. Not today. She finally turned toward me, tilting her head just slightly, that ever-present smirk still playing at the edges of her lips. Evelyn. She said my name like it was a victory. Like she had just stepped into this room and asserted dominance over it. A slow creeping heat climbed up my spine. I forced my expression to remain neutral. Forced myself to keep my hand steady. Even as my nails dug into my palm. Because the truth was I didn't know how to respond to this. What was the correct reaction when your stepsister, who had already gone out of her way to sabotage your wedding date, waltzed into your reception in a wedding dress? A sick, twisted power move, designed to rip the attention away from me. And the worst part? It was working. People were still staring at her, at me, at Nathan. Waiting. Because suddenly this wasn't my wedding reception anymore. It was a goddamn spectacle. A scene straight out of a reality TV show. And I was the punchline. Not again. Not this time. Nathan must have sensed the volcanic fury simmering beneath my skin. Because his grip on my waist tightened, subtle, protective. I could feel him bracing. Ready to step in. Ready to handle this for me. But I didn't want that. I needed to do this my way. So I took a breath, smoothed out the fabric of my gown, and met her gaze head-on. Madeline, I said, voice calm. You're at the wrong reception. A few people nearby gasped. Not because of what I said, but because of the way I said it. Sharp. Cold. Unapologetic. Madeline blinked, caught off guard. Only for a second. Then, she recovered. Oh, but am I? She gestured around, her eyes glittering with fake amusement. This is Astoria Grand, right? And I did have my ceremony here earlier. You don't mind if I pop in and say hi, do you? She said it so smoothly, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. Like she wasn't wearing a goddamn wedding dress at someone else's wedding reception. Like this wasn't a power play. I let out a slow breath, scanning her up and down. Then I smiled. Not a warm, welcoming smile. No. A knife-sharp smile. Of course not, I said. By all means, Madeline. Enjoy the reception. Because what she didn't know, what she hadn't realized yet, this wasn't just my wedding. This was the beginning of her undoing. Let me take you back. Because for you to understand why Madeline showing up at my wedding like that in a wedding gown, no less, wasn't some shocking, once-in-a-lifetime betrayal, you have to understand something. This wasn't new. This was my entire life. My name is Evelyn, and if you ask my parents, I wasn't the eldest daughter or the responsible one or the smart one. I was just the other daughter. The one who faded into the background. The one who barely got a nod of acknowledgement at family gatherings. The one people forgot to introduce. Meanwhile, Madeline was the son. Beautiful. Charismatic. Born with that effortless grace that made people fawn over her, excuse her, worship her. She was the golden child. She could do no wrong. And me? If I even breathed incorrectly. My parents would sigh, shake their heads, and mutter, "Why can't you be more like Madeline?" I should have been used to it. But here's the thing. You never really get used to being treated like you don't matter. Growing up, I learned early on that love in my family was conditional. Madeline? She was adored simply for existing. She could throw tantrums, fail tests, crash my dad's car, and my parents would bend over backwards to justify it. She's just passionate. She didn't mean it. The test was unfair. Oh, it's just a car, don't be so dramatic. Me? I forgot to take the trash out one time, and it was a full-blown crisis. Evelyn, why are you so careless? You need to learn responsibility. Madeline would never be this forgetful. And that's the irony, isn't it? Madeline was the careless one. But it never mattered because they never let her face consequences. By the time we were teenagers, it was common knowledge in our family that Madeline got what she wanted. If she wanted something I had, it became hers. A dress I loved? Suddenly. It was too expensive for me but magically perfect for Madeline. A hobby I was passionate about? If I mentioned liking art, my parents scoffed, that's a waste of time. But when Madeline took an art class on a whim, she's so creative. We should support her. And then there was Josh, the first boy I ever had a crush on. I never even told anyone. I never even spoke to him. But somehow Madeline knew. And within a week, she was dating him. She held his hand in front of me, laughing, whispering in his ear, making sure I saw it all. And the worst part? Josh didn't even seem that into her. He wasn't her type. She only did it to prove a point. She only did it to prove she could. At some point, I stopped trying. Stopped fighting for attention. Stopped trying to be seen. Instead, I threw myself into my studies. Because school didn't play favorites. Because grades didn't care if you were the golden child. And unlike my parents, success actually acknowledged my hard work. I studied late into the night. I aced my exams. I graduated top of my class while Madeline barely scraped by. And for the first time in my life, I had something she couldn't take from me. Or so I thought. Then I met Nathan. And for the first time I felt seen. He wasn't just kind. He wasn't just patient. He was the first person who ever made me feel like I was enough. And when he proposed, it was the happiest moment of my life. I thought finally, something that was mine. Something she couldn't touch. Something she couldn't ruin. I was wrong. 3 weeks after I announced my engagement, Madeline made her own announcement. I still remember the way she smiled, slow and satisfied as she casually dropped the bomb. "Oh, Evelyn, you won't believe this. We're getting married on the same day. What are the odds?" "Odds? Please." She planned this. She planned it the second she realized I had something that wasn't about her. And the worst part? Our parents sided with her. Madeline's wedding is just more of a grand event. You don't mind, right? My mother said, barely even looking at me, as if my wedding was just a side note to hers, as if I was supposed to just accept it. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel hurt. I didn't feel like crying. I felt angry. No, I was furious, because this time she had gone too far. Because this time she wasn't taking a dress or a hobby or a crush. She was taking my wedding, my day, my moment. And I wasn't going to let her. I could have cried. I could have begged my parents to see reason. But what would that have changed? Nothing. So instead, I smiled. I smiled and I nodded and I said, of course. I don't mind. Because if she wanted a war, she was getting one. And this time, I was going to win. Madeline and I had booked the same venue, the Astoria Grand Hotel. Well, technically, I booked it first. But that never mattered when it came to Madeline and what Madeline wanted. The second she found out I had chosen this venue, she made sure she got the prime evening slot. The main event time. The one that truly mattered in her eyes. Which left me with the afternoon slot. A supposedly quieter, forgettable time. At least that's what she thought. I could still hear my mother's voice echoing in my head. Madeline's wedding is just more of a grand event. You don't mind, right? Right. Because why would I mind? Why would I possibly care that my own parents saw my wedding as an afterthought? Why would I be upset that they had already made their choice, one they had been making since we were kids? So I let them think they had won. I let them think I had accepted it. I smiled. I nodded. And I said, of course I don't mind. But inside I was done. Done being second place. Done being overlooked. Done letting Madeline take whatever she wanted. So, I did what she never expected. I played my own game. Madeline wanted to be the center of attention? Fine. She could have her over-the-top, ridiculously extravagant evening affair, complete with chandeliers, champagne towers, and whatever ridiculous spectacle she had planned. Because my reception? It was going to be better. And not just nice better. Unforgettable better. With the help of Nathan's family, I transformed my so-called small and quiet reception into something nobody would forget. My father-in-law? Oh, he just so happened to be the CEO of a major company. And guess what? He personally invited dozens of high-profile guests, executives, business partners, investors, the kind of people that Madeline's new husband, Oliver, had been desperate to impress. And now? As Madeline stepped into my reception, still wearing her wedding gown from her ceremony earlier, she realized something was very, very wrong. It wasn't a quiet, empty ballroom. It wasn't a second-rate gathering of a few overlooked friends and distant relatives. It was packed. It was alive. Music vibrated through the room, blending seamlessly with the hum of conversation and the bursts of laughter echoing from every corner. The atmosphere was electric, a celebration that felt full, joyous, unstoppable. And the guests? Many of them were hers. I saw it happen in real time. The way her face dropped for just a fraction of a second before she schooled her expression back into something more controlled. But it was there. That moment of realization. That split second where she understood. This was not how today was supposed to go. Her fingers tightened slightly around the folds of her gown. Tiny, barely perceptible flinch as her eyes flickered over the room. She recognized too many faces. People she had expected to be at her reception. People she had thought she had stolen from me. People who had chosen to come here instead. Nathan noticed it too. His hand rested lightly against the small of my back. A subtle gesture. A silent reminder. You won. You did this. And damn right. I did. Because for once, just once, I was the one taking something from her. For once, she was the one standing in the background watching. For once, she was the one being overshadowed. She took a slow step forward, her chin lifting slightly, as if trying to regain control of the moment. As if pretending nothing was wrong could change the fact that everything was. Her voice was light, casual, almost amused. Evelyn, she said, as if she had just stumbled in by accident. As if she hadn't deliberately walked in here, dressed in a freaking wedding gown, expecting to make this moment about her. The thing is, a few years ago this would have worked. A few years ago, I would have shrunk under her gaze, fumbled over my words, made excuses for why I should let her have this moment. But not today. Today I was done playing her games. So instead, I smiled. Not a nervous, uncertain smile. No, a calculated, sharp, knowing smile. One that said, I see you. I know exactly what you're trying to do. And it's not going to work this time. Madeline, I said, voice smooth, easy. You're a little overdressed. Don't you think? A ripple of amusement moved through the guests closest to us. A few people outright laughed. Madeline's smile tightened. It was barely noticeable. A flicker. A half-second of tension before she smoothed it away, tilting her head slightly. "Oh, this," she said, gesturing at her wedding gown, as if she had forgotten she was wearing it. As if it wasn't the entire point of her walking in here. "I just thought I'd stop by. Since we both got married today. Thought I'd come say congratulations." I didn't believe her for a second, and she knew that. She knew that I knew. That's what made this fun. Because for once I had the upper hand. So I just smiled again. Stepping slightly closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear me. "You thought my wedding would be an afterthought," I said, voice soft, almost gentle. "You thought nobody would care. You thought you could take everything in." I gestured slightly, letting my gaze sweep the ballroom, the packed room, the people who had chosen me over her. And still come out on top. I let that sink in for a second before I looked back at her. And then I delivered the final blow. "But you were wrong, weren't you?" There it was. That moment of truth. That tiny, flickering second where she knew I had one. Where she knew this wasn't her night anymore. Where she knew I wasn't the same girl who used to back down. Where she knew, for the first time in our entire lives, she had lost. And I had never felt more alive. I watched as Madeline's expression shifted, twisted, fractured into something almost unreadable. But I knew what it was. Realization. Fear. Panic. She was losing control. Her brand new husband, Oliver, stood frozen beside her, scanning the room as if his brain was still struggling to process what he was seeing. His face went ghostly pale. His gaze flickered from table to table. His breathing slightly uneven as recognition started to dawn. "Wait, why are all the people from my company here?" he whispered, his voice strained, like he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Nathan, standing beside me, didn't even try to hide his amusement. With a casual smirk, he leaned in slightly. "Oh, you didn't hear? My dad invited them." And just like that, Oliver's entire world shifted. You could see it happen. The way his shoulders tensed. The way his jaw locked. The way his entire posture stiffened. Like his whole reality had just been rewritten in real time. "No way." His voice came out hoarse, barely above a breath. He turned fully toward Nathan, as if somehow looking him in the eye would change what he had just heard. "Your father is the CEO?" Nathan just smiled. Calm. Collected. Unbothered. "Yup." He took a sip of his drink, completely at ease, then added, "And let's just say, they preferred our reception." The silence that followed was suffocating. It stretched between them, heavy, tense, thick with the weight of something about to break. Oliver's gaze darted back toward his co-workers, his boss's business partners, his potential investors, all sitting comfortably at my wedding. Not Madeline's. Not his. Mine. Madeline's fingers clenched around the fabric of her dress, knuckles turning white. Her entire composed, elegant, flawless exterior was cracking at the seams. She turned to Oliver, eyes wide, expectant, waiting for him to laugh this off. To dismiss it. To say something like, "Oh well, no big deal." Instead, he looked furious. Not embarrassed. Not confused. Just furious. "Madeline, did you know about this?" His voice came out low, sharp, dangerous. Madeline blinked. "What?" "No. How was I supposed to know?" The panic in her voice betrayed her. Oliver's eyes darkened. His entire face hardened into something cold, something unfamiliar. "You told me our wedding was going to be the event of the year. That everyone important would be there." Madeline stumbled over her words, desperate to keep hold of whatever little control she had left. "Well, it was supposed to be. How was I supposed to know Evelyn's wedding would?" And then she stopped, because she saw it. She saw the eyes on her. Dozens of guests, colleagues, high-profile connections, all watching her perfect life fall apart in real time. Oliver let out a short, bitter laugh, a sound completely void of amusement. "This is humiliating." The words came out clipped, sharp as a blade. "You planned this whole thing just to one-up your sister, and now we look like complete idiots." Madeline's mouth fell open in a small, shocked gasp. "I did it for us," she blurted out. Reaching for his arm, Oliver stepped back, like he didn't even want her to touch him. And then his next words, they sealed her fate. "No, Madeline, you did it for yourself." I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Because this wasn't just a minor slip-up. This wasn't just one bad moment at a wedding. This was a public execution of her reputation, her marriage, and her entire sense of control. Because now, everyone here knew exactly who she was. They saw it with their own eyes. They heard her admit it, and there was no coming back from that. A weighted silence settled over the room. The kind that makes your skin prickle, makes you hyper-aware of every movement, every breath. Then, with a final, devastating blow, Oliver turned on his heel and stormed out. Madeline stood frozen, still in her wedding gown, still in the middle of my reception, still surrounded by hundreds of people who now knew the truth. For the first time in her life, she had no way out. And that was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. My parents were still standing there, watching in stunned silence. Their golden child, their perfect daughter, had just been humiliated beyond repair in front of hundreds of people. For the first time in their lives, they couldn't spin this. They couldn't make excuses for her. They couldn't pretend everything was fine, because everyone had seen it happen. And now they were panicking. I saw the exact moment the shift happened. The moment they realized Madeline was no longer their best bet, that her reputation was ruined, that she was no longer the prized daughter who could do no wrong. And suddenly, they were looking at me differently, like I was valuable again, like I was worth acknowledging, like I was the safer bet now. I almost laughed, because really, now they wanted to act like I mattered? Now after years of dismissing me? Now after watching Madeline try to sabotage my wedding? Now after choosing her over and over and over again? I had to admit, their audacity was impressive. My mother was the first to break. She took a careful step toward me, masking her panic with a forced motherly smile. "Evelyn, honey," she started, her voice dripping with false warmth. "We always knew you were the more responsible one." I held up a hand. "Nope." Just like that, her smile froze. Like she genuinely hadn't expected me to shut her down. Like she thought I would just welcome them back with open arms. Like nothing had ever happened. My father tried next. His voice was calmer, more measured, like he was trying to reason with me. "Evelyn, let's not be hasty. We're still family." I shook my head, cutting him off. "No, you don't get to do this now." The weight of my words hit them hard. I could see it in the way their expressions flickered, the way my mother's face twisted with desperation, the way my father's mouth pressed into a thin line. They weren't used to this. They weren't used to me being the one in control. But my mother tried again. I didn't let her finish. "No," I said it calmly, firmly, and with finality. "You made your choice. Now live with it." It was the same thing they had always told me growing up. Whenever Madeline got more attention, whenever Madeline got better opportunities, whenever Madeline got anything and everything she wanted, while I was expected to accept whatever scraps were left. "Don't be dramatic, Evelyn. You should be happy for your sister. Madeline just has a stronger personality. It's natural she gets more attention. You shouldn't expect everything to be equal." Well, now they knew what it felt like. Their faces fell. They knew there was no coming back from this. I had given them chances before. I had let them get away with it before. But not this time. This time I was done. I turned away from them, walking back toward the people who had actually stood by me, the people who had actually loved me, my real family. Nathan took my hand as I reached his side, his grip warm, steady, unwavering. "You okay?" he murmured, his eyes searching mine. I squeezed his hand. Never better. And I meant it. As for Madeline, her marriage was over before the honeymoon even started. Within days, word spread like wildfire about how she had sabotaged her own wedding by being obsessed with ruining mine. She became the laughingstock of our social circle. People gossiped about it at parties, whispered about it over drinks. "Did you hear what she did at her sister's wedding?" I still can't believe she actually walked in wearing a wedding dress. God, can you imagine how desperate you'd have to be? She tried to salvage what was left of her reputation, but there was no salvaging this. Madeline had always lived for appearances, and now, her image was shattered beyond repair. And my parents? They were furious. Not because they had suddenly grown a conscience. Not because they had finally realized how unfairly they had treated me. No, They were furious because they had spent nearly $100,000 on Madeline's wedding, only for it to be a public disaster. They weren't angry for me. They weren't even angry at Madeline. They were angry because they had wasted their money on a wedding that would now only be remembered as a spectacle of humiliation. I felt no sympathy for them. Not anymore. And me? Nathan and I had the best night of our lives. We laughed. We danced. We celebrated. With people who actually cared about us. With people who actually showed up for us. With people who actually loved us. I cut off my toxic family for good that night. Because I had a new family now. One that didn't just pretend to love me when it was convenient. One that didn't just see my worth after they lost everything else. One that actually loved me. As for Madeline, well, last I heard, she was still trying to figure out where it all went wrong. But Karma? Karma knew exactly where.